Hello, John from Classic Auto Restoration here. A lot of people have been asking me about the proper way to set up hydraulic lifters and valve springs in the 8-12 cylinder motors. I had manufactured valve springs for about the last 10 years. One of the things that most people don't realize is the valve spring probably takes some of the most of the use out of any part in the motor. What I used to tell everybody, one easy way to understand that is if you took a metal paper clip and you bent it back and forth a whole bunch of times in your hand and you touched the point that where you were bending it, it would be so hot it would probably burn you. When this spring's been oscillating in your engine for the last 70 years, up and down, up and up and down, it's taken a tremendous amount of abuse. Nobody checks spring height or spring pressures. It is extremely important, especially on these motors with hydraulic lifters. If you have a motor with high oil pressure and hydraulic lifters, I've seen engines with weak spring pressure and have a skip while they were running, and what would happen is the hydraulic lifter would actually open the valve off its seat and cause a skip in the motor. Very hard to diagnose, real pain in the neck to fix because you got to take everything apart. To properly set up the valve spring height, you're going to need a tool called a valve spring mic or something similar to that. What this is a little tiny micrometer that has a hole in the center, and what you do with this is you slip it over the valve and the valve stem while it's installed in the block, and you would install a valve spring retainer and a pair of keepers. And so you're basically assembling it without the spring, and then what you do is you would turn that and you take that up, and that measures in turn the height of the spring or the distance from the block to the valve spring retainer. So that gives you a specification of how high the spring sits in the block. Very, very important. Nobody checks this stuff. You can't just throw a shim in there and assume it's going to be right. In checking this engine that I'm working on, what I'm finding is the specs are all over the place with every one. I mark everything I work on. Every component of this engine, every valve gets marked to its particular hole. So now I know that that valve seat is accurate for this valve. I've already set up the hydraulic lifter depth, and that is set for this marked valve in its hole. Okay? And now when I measure this valve height, this spring height, with a particular keeper and retainer that is set for this valve, they have to stay together as an assembly. All keepers and retainers are slightly different, so if you mix them up, you won't have an accurate reading and you won't have an accurate spring pressure. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this assembly and we're going to install it in the block, and we're going to slack this mic up, and I'm going to show you guys in a second what everything looks like slacked up. And then I'm going to adjust the mic, and I'm going to come up with a number which is the length of the spring while it's installed in the block. Okay? So on this particular hole right here, this spring installs at 2-inch 205 thousandths. Okay? This spring is supposed to install at 2-inch 093, or we can round it off and say 090. Okay? So that's 115 thousandths difference on this valve in spring height. So in turn, the spring is 115 thousandths too long. And everybody says, well, what does that mean? That doesn't sound like a lot. It doesn't really matter. So this spring now sits 115 thousandths too tall in the block. So we need to get it to the proper spec. We need to shim this down 115 thousandths. Now we have shims available commercially for valve springs. Every reputable machine shop has them. They're available sometimes in different thicknesses. We got 15, 30, and 60 thousandths here. So what we want to do is come up as close to 115 thousandths as we can. 260s will give me 120. That'll be close enough. I'm going to bring you over to my valve spring tester, and we're going to look at how much 115 thousandths makes a difference on valve spring pressure, so you can understand the problems that this can create on your engine. So I'll come around this side and I'll show you. So we have a factory calibrated valve spring tester here, and I'm going to set my height of my valve spring tester. This is a 2-inch block, and I'm going to zero the machine. So I set it up and I zero it. So now at 2-inch I'm 0, but my height is 2-inch 090. So what I want to do is I'm going to bring this down until I get to that spec of 090. Unfortunately my tester isn't working, but I already know that's 60 pounds. Okay? Now if I bring this up from that point 115 thousandths and make it 115 thousandths longer, okay, we go up to there, and we are now at about 39 to 40 pounds at 115 thousandths longer. So if you were to install this spring in this motor without shimming it, you would only have about 40 pounds on the spring. If you have an engine that makes 50 pounds of oil pressure driving down the road, there's a good possibility that the hydraulic lifter would push this valve off the seat and cause the engine to skip. But I can't stress how important this is for everybody to do this properly. Once again, when you do this, make sure you remember that all the components have to be matched to where you measure them. So if you take an assembly of a valve spring retainer and a pair of keepers, they have to stay with that particular valve. That should answer all the questions for everybody, for everything they need to know to set up valve spring height. Very important, make sure it's done on all 8s and 12s. Thank you.